Happy holidays, one and all, from the No Name Cinema Society. It is our Indie Spotlight. It is December the 26th, 2017. It's a Tuesday, the day after Christmas. We are continuing our spotlighting of indies from 5 years ago, indies from 2012. Hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts. I hope you all had a terrific Christmas, Hanukkah, happy holidays overall. Thank you for day after Christmas. As you can see, I'm back to LA, but not my own apartment. I'm back in Playa del Rey for what I think is one final time of cat sitting. And this is probably the last time you'll see me in this apartment. But so let me go straight into intros, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start with the radical movie pass activist. Drunk Davie is here with us. How you doing, Davie?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. How was your holiday?
That was fantastic.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And also with us, we have a returning guest that you've only met once. He is a dating app activist. Devon Michaels is back with us. He did hair with us about a month or so ago, and now he's back for today's Indie Spotlight. Devon, how are you? Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
And also happy Boxing Day.
Yeah, isn't that something special? I'm glad you mentioned it, JB.
And this is the first time we've had the double Ds. We've got Davie and Devon here together for the first time. When Devon did hair with us, we had Jim Carroll instead of Davie. So you guys were a team for the first time.
Oh, you guys did heroin?
Live on the show while reviewing the movie Hair. So it's appropriate, I think.
You're not going to trick me into watching that video, by the
way. Come watch the video where we did heroin. Devon, I don't suppose you're drinking with me tonight, are you?
Not drinking with you tonight.
Oh my God, I've got my Elysian Space Dust IPA again. I liked it. I tried it in the show not too long ago. So that's what I'm doing right now. Right now, let's go over the schedule for our 45th series of episodes. A few days ago, we did The Last Jedi, Star Wars movie. We did on Thursday, December 21st. Now, of course, we're doing our Indie Spotlight, December the 26th, How to Survive a Plague, the documentary from 2012. In just a few days, Thursday, December 28th, we got another Last movie. We've got The Last Emperor coming up, a discussion of that movie. And Devon will be back with us on January 2nd for our 29th Sound Off. Also, since I was in New York for that review, I've got a new friend. A new member of the society I want to introduce to the show here, ladies and gentlemen. Davie's looking nervous. Ladies and gentlemen, it's about time for Luke to join in honor of our Star Wars work here. He's going to block Ginger, the cat. Luke Skywalker is back with us. Since I don't have Bogart here in Playa del Rey, I've now got Luke to join the society. You excited, Davie?
Yeah, you bet.
So today, of course, is December 26th. Historically, today's the day. In 1973, The Exorcist premiered on this day. It was the first true horror film to be nominated for Best Picture. We'll see if Get Out follows in its footsteps this year. In 2004, an earthquake in the Indian Ocean that hits 9.3 on the Richter scale creates a tsunami that devastates countries like Sri Lanka, India, Indonesia, and Thailand, devastating that whole region. And on a more personal note, today on this day, 1997, 20 years ago today, my father passed away from a year-long battle with melanoma at the age of 53. My father, whether he intended to do it or not, is probably the strongest influence in terms of introducing me to older films in particular and getting me interested in storytelling and this industry overall. On the 20th anniversary of his passing, I would like to dedicate this show to him this evening. On the show, of course, we're continuing to spotlight indies from 2012, and tonight's indie is a documentary called How to Survive a Plague. And the trivia for it from one of the last Indie Spotlight, my little hint that I left for you all, is that it was the trivia was an investigative reporter turns his book into an Oscar-nominated documentary. And that New York Times investigative reporter was David France, who directed this documentary. It lost the Oscar to Searching for Sugar Man, if you guys remember that documentary from 2012.
I don't.
Vaguely.
They don't remember that. It's the one whose director died. This is our third documentary that we've done on the show. Davie, do you remember the other two documentaries we've done?
I know we did the well yes, we did the Chicago the crime one in Chicago. What was that one called?
It was called The
Interrupters,
Interrupters.
the Interrupters. And we did the music one. What's his face?
He's right, but he doesn't remember the proper nouns are hard for Davey sometimes. It's called 10,000 Days on Earth, documentary about Nick Cave, and that was in season 1. And season 2, episode 33.2, I think it was, we did The Interrupters, which was a documentary about a group of people trying to stop the gang violence in Chicago. Devin, I don't suppose you've seen either of those documentaries.
I have not.
As Devin continues to munch while we do our show, we found a better time to have dinner.
Sorry.
Multitasking, it's good.
Yeah, you're the master. So anyway, it's time for summary. You guys good?
Oh yeah.
Oh yes, it's summary time. 6 years into the AIDS epidemic, key members of the LGBT community in New York band together to form ACT UP, an angry activist group set out to demand that the U.S. and local governments devote money and resources to the treatment of the disease that was ravaging their community and to also ultimately find a cure. Guys, how was that summary?
It's good. Really good.
I agree.
Some nice comments from Davey Joe the day after Christmas. So full disclosure, I'm recommending this, so I get to go first a little bit. I saw it for the first time at the Indie Spirit Award screenings in early 2013 because it was nominated in 2012 for that year. Director David France attended for a Q&A along with one of the film's characters, activist Peter Staley. Like I said about the last documentary we did in episode 33.2, The Interrupters, this movie is about heroes to me. Real, true-life heroes that likely save millions of lives through their efforts. Now, we don't judge here in content per se, we discuss execution of a film. And I feel like this film achieves maximum emotional impact through its dynamic editing that sets up characters like a regular narrative. People begin to follow, admire, and root for. So before having to watch it for this show, had either of you seen it before or heard of this film?
Neither for me.
I had heard of it, but only vaguely. I just barely knew what it was about.
Last time we did opening thoughts, Devin's was way too long, so I want to let Davey go first so we can show him how it's done.
Yeah, you stole my thunder a bit. I was going to say it's a master class in editing.
Sorry, I rarely go first, so I apologize for stealing your thunder. It rarely happens. Devin, so that's how opening thoughts are done. What do you think?
I thought it was a beautifully executed documentary that successfully hits a good balance between shaming you a little bit and also, like you said, being a bit of a triumph about heroes. Technically,
it was one sentence that is opening thought. It was a very, very long sentence, but technically one sentence. You achieved the goal here tonight, Devin. To Davey's point, that's sort of I was going to start. Is really I think it's about editing. This movie is built on its editing. And first and foremost, I think the access that the movie had to some terrific archival footage. To add to that, this movie brings you to places where you never thought that you'd be able to see. That level of detail, I think, was really good. Is that sort of one of the things you're referring to, Davey?
Yeah, I mean, just having the footage and then piecing it together the way that they did was fantastic. It's hard to just take a lot of tape and turn it into a narrative without a lot of overdubbing and speech, and there wasn't much of that.
There was no narrator, no voice of God or anything like that. Devin, what do you think?
Absolutely. I completely agree with what's been said. That really is the best way to tell stories in the documentary format. Get all the footage you can and all the interviews you can, and then organize what you show the way you would organize a formal essay for a class in college, where you really have to have an outline that's so intricate, you don't need to introduce it with anything fancy. You can just see those transitions happening if you're a viewer that's at all observant.
What the structure did is it allowed for character development to some degree. Like it allowed for us to really attach ourselves to some of these characters, if you will. They're real people, but for all intents and purposes of the movie, they are characters. They are building them up. We're getting to know them. They're given their at times they're right and at times they're wrong. Like there's layers to these people that we're seeing, and maybe we'll get to that momentarily. And in telling it chronologically too, it allowed for us to sort of live this with them. Like I feel like we were in those meetings, those ACT UP meetings. I feel like we were there.
The subject matter is a lot more effective because it's being told by people that are, number one, they're infected with the disease, and they're on the front lines. You're getting attached to to people, historical figures that are fighting this battle, and you know it's not going to work out. That's playing in the back of your mind, and it's kind of like building and building in your chest while you're watching this. It's really something else.
But in spite of knowing, whether or not it's going to work out, like it's the details. Like, we weren't necessarily aware of some of like the minute details that really make a big difference. You know what I mean? Like wherever we were aware of in the grand like news report, some type of thing, like this happened at this conference and so thing, and we're like, okay, there was a protest here, and a lot of us were young at the time, maybe not Devon, but the rest of us were young. So
we knew that likely we were getting attached to people that were not going to survive the film.
But then there's a nice surprise when some of them do at the end.
Yeah, it is.
That particular reveal of suddenly seeing the faces on screen of some of these characters who we had previously only seen in old footage, and then suddenly seeing that they are among the voices we've been hearing throughout the film here and there, but then we're seeing their faces, and we're seeing their faces today or 2012 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That was one of the most powerful documentary moments I've ever seen.
That's sort of what I was getting to about the structure, like that chronological effort sort of like allowed for that to happen. You know what I mean? Like that was great storytelling.
Yeah. They purposely held back some of their cards.
And I think there's a lot of moments that are particularly dynamic. I mean, I think that the film also has a good pace. We talk about the structure and the overall editing. We talk about the two types of editing. We talk about the in-scene editing, the shot-to-shot juxtaposition, and also the overall editing where you sort of determine the structure. Almost two different kinds of art forms to some degree, and a good editor can do both. But then this film does do both, because I think about some of the protest scenes, and they were particularly dynamic, using footage from all different sources, it seems, juxtaposing them together with the way that the police were handling them and the chants. That was particularly dynamic. One of the most impactful moments for me is when there's some infighting going on and Larry Kramer has a sudden outburst, yelling the word plague in the middle of a meeting. That really had an impact on me. It was powerful. And a lot of that is born from the way that they move these scenes. It couldn't have been directed any better if it were staged. They had enough footage to tell those moments as if they had made them up.
Yes.
The plague scene, that shot, if you were filming a drama, that's the shot you would use. Like, it's crazy how good it was.
Yeah. And I mean, like, a lot of these folks weren't necessarily trained documentarians when they were taking the footage. They're really just, part of this community that's just, shooting some stuff for posterity purposes. I don't think they necessarily ever intended this to happen.
There was something about that in particular that I thought was a really great example of what the film did several times, which is it sort of acknowledges that these are human beings who were desperate and terrified and therefore terribly imperfect, despite some of them being outright heroes, like we said. It doesn't dance around that fact.
That's part of what was so engaging, the character development. Like, they were three-dimensional, warts and all.
Yes.
And this movie, in spite of all what it had to convey, it never felt overly didactic. It was informative, but simultaneously emotionally engaging. And it sounds like you guys agree with that.
It was really informative, the way it handled the science, sort of the difficult questions surrounding the science, especially the way that the intersection of science and politics, and how to best deal with rolling out new drugs and approving new drugs. I mean, it's a lot of complex stuff that it just handled beautifully.
When the Merck scientist came in, like that one particular Merck scientist did a really good job of explaining that to a layman. Like, I thought that was really impressive. What about you? Dispersal of information.
Yeah, I thought that was another thing that was very well done. I thought that the crossover between the political questions, the scientific questions, the moral questions, it never it never lingered too long on any one of those without bringing us back to how it connects to the other two, or the fourth one, if you will, to all the emotional elements and the characters that we're meeting, the people that we're meeting. It really balanced all of those things at the same time.
My next thing is something we've already talked about, the well-roundedness of it, how it showed several sides to the battle for AIDS research and the discord within the community, and allowed for its own interpretation instead of beating us over the head like some documentaries might with I'm right, you're wrong. It wasn't that. It just sort of allowed us to interpret our own sort of thing.
I think that's a really good point. It does kind of go back and show that maybe their tact early on as far as pressuring the FDA and rolling out drugs quicker and making drugs available to the public quicker, they sort of questioned it and maybe changed things a bit. So I do think that it absolutely shows that these people were completely well-intentioned and that maybe everything didn't work out exactly the way they wanted it to.
There was a result that it achieved,
Absolutely.
that I think is truly heroic, and different sides will take claim, for it, and that sort of leads me to my next thing is the politics of it to some degree, because I think it is an interesting discussion to have, and this is I think we're all agreed about how good the film is, and Davey, I hope you can participate in this debate, given that it's more historical in nature to some degree. But one of the things that the film addresses is this concept of treatment versus activism. And how this sort of splinter group TAG split off of ACT UP and started to work with the medical community more closely instead of the protests and the outrage and things of that nature. And it was an interesting debate within the film. It's almost like the film wasn't sure what actually got it done, or if it was some combination of two. Devon, I'll let you go first. I mean, what are your thoughts about this treatment versus activism thing?
I think that is the central message of the film. Because it's so well-rounded and avoids being propaganda about any other question, there's something about what happens in the end, which is truly inspirational. It took combining the approaches or the perspectives of the treatment-oriented people and the activism-oriented people. It took combining those two to actually get the big breakthrough, which ended up saving so many millions of lives.
The way I interpret it, it's almost as if the rage and the protests and the activism and some of their, very strong-arming tactics, at one point Ed Koch called them fascist tactics.
Right.
Some of those tactics loosened the jar, maybe, and then the treatment people came in and TAG came in and opened the rest of the jar to make it possible. That's sort of how I interpret it.
I think it was even more than that. I think it was even more synergistic than that.
If it was synergistic, the movie did not make it seem like it was intentionally so. Like, it seemed like those groups were at odds.
Yeah. But I think that's why it seemed to me to be this amazing, inspirational, like, oh, wow, this is how the human spirit triumphs when we realize, even inadvertently, which is, I agree with you, it was inadvertent on their parts. But I think that the activism side was generally, shaking the trees, saying, hey, we're looking for that one new drug that you haven't found yet. And that
you say shaking the trees, I say, loosening the jar. It's similar.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm saying I think it's even more miraculous, because I think that what happened, what it seemed like the film suggested, was that it was because the activist had been shaking the trees or loosening the jar in terms of saying, hey, we have to get the research stuff happening faster, looking for that one miracle drug. Because they got that approach and they got combined with the treatment people who were more like, let's just actually listen to the people who are at this late stage of this disease, and what are we doing to just keep them barely alive or whatever it is. And then it was the combination of those two that made them realize, the scientists finally realized, oh, if we use these 5 things together, they figured that out because of talking more to the people who are more like, hey, let's just take care of people who are suffering.
What we'll never know for sure is whether, if the ACT UP had taken the TAG approach initially, if that would have worked on its own. Like, there's no way to know that for sure. And because that technically is the more diplomatic approach. Davey, are you willing to opine on this treatment versus activism?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's almost an aha moment in the film where the TAG folks and the ACT UP folks are arguing. The one representative from TAG explains the study that they want to run, and it seems to make sense. And the guy says, well, I'm glad that someone came here and explained that to us. But I think that the film sets up the the idea that had the ACT UP people not been so successful in streamlining the process of getting drugs approved quicker, would the tag philosophy of the study with the placebo, would that have been able to work? Would they have been able to combine those drugs and do that study had those drugs not been fast-tracked and been available and there'd been so much data on those individual drugs? I don't know. It makes it, it just makes the film even more interesting. Obviously, it hits you on an emotional level, but from a scientific and just intellectual level, it's fascinating.
And that brings up, as far as ACT's concerned, some of their more extreme methodologies, which I found very problematic. And I would argue that even the film and the filmmaker, from the way that it approached, seems torn by these. We're yelling in the middle of St. Patrick's Cathedral. Granted, the Cardinal of New York was way out of line. I mean, his comments were horrendous, but the way that they sort of attacked a mass at St. Patrick's with a bunch of people that didn't do anything wrong is there. Like the Cardinal's one thing, but those parishioners maybe not. Throwing the ashes of those that had passed on the White House lawn. Those things are a little uncomfortable for me on multiple levels. And at the center of this was a gentleman by the name of Bob Rafsky, one of the activists, who might be best known for yelling at Bill Clinton in the middle of Bill Clinton's campaign. Several times throughout the film, he would point at one individual and say, "You are killing me." Potentially effective, I suppose, from an attention-getting point of view. Ridiculous to suggest that one person, whether it's the president of the United States or not, even the president, has to run stuff through Congress. And I'm not justifying the behavior of Reagan, Bush, or even Clinton, as far as the AIDS crisis was concerned. I was consistently uncomfortable, maybe purposefully so. Devon, that's probably Devon's argument, but that approach, because it didn't seem truly fair necessarily. And I've got a little clip from the film of a very eloquent speech that Bob Rafsky made, and using a funeral as PR. It's a beautifully delivered and written speech, but at the same time, I feel a little icky about it. And it's on the eve of the 1992 presidential election. Take a look.
Let everyone here know that this is not a political funeral for Mark Fisher, who wouldn't let us burn or bury his courage or his love for us any more than he would let the earth take his body until it was already in flight. He asked for this ceremony not so we could bury him, but so we could celebrate his undying anger. This isn't a political funeral for Mark. It's a political funeral for the man who killed him, and so many others, and is slowly killing me, whose name curls my tongue and curdles my breath. George Bush, we believe you'll be defeated tomorrow because we believe there's still some justice left in the universe and some compassion left in the American people. But whether or not you are, here and now, standing by Mark's body, we put this curse on you. Mark's spirit will haunt you until the end of your days, so that in the moment of your defeat, you'll remember our defeats, and in the moment of your death, you'll remember our deaths. As for Mark, when the living can no longer speak, the dead may speak for them. Mark's voice is here with us, as is the voice of Pericles, who 2 millennia ago mourned the Athenian soldiers who didn't have to die and in whose death he was complicit, but who had the nobility to say that their memorial was the whole earth. Let the whole earth hear us now. We beg, we pray, we demand that this epidemic end. Not just so we may live, but so that Mark's soul may rest in peace at last. And in anger and in grief, this fight is not over till all of us are safe.
And I understand the rage, but pointing it at any one individual feels more of a PR move than anything that's. It seemed like more of a systemic problem. But anyway, so how do you guys feel about whether it's Bob Rafsky or any of these other sort of extreme methodologies? That again, my argument is the film seems sort of mixed. Has mixed feelings about them. Like they got the attention, but they were a little potentially out of line.
The Republican convention was not from President Bush himself, to get to your point, but there was a lot of stuff in that convention that was just straight up homophobic in nature. And given the history of the way that the government approached the disease, it was clear that there was a lot of reticence to put a lot into it because people didn't want to be politically allied with gays. That's where that came from. And it's hard, because I agree. It's, for him to be that specific about who he's blaming, it feels a little odd. But I think in that context, the historical context, that's where he was coming from. And if you look at it that way, maybe it makes a little more sense. Yeah,
I mean, the only one I didn't have a problem with was the Jesse Helms house thing. That I had no problem with.
It deserved a lot worse. Absolutely.
I think that the film does an excellent job of not really taking its own stand on this question.
I agree.
It just sort of says, here's how it was handled. There are moments that are going to make a lot of people feel uncomfortable, and feel not just uncomfortable, but feel that it's perhaps a little bit wrong, perhaps a little bit unfair to some of these people that were being attacked. And then also the other side of that, which is actually this is what was required to get some results. I couldn't begrudge him being pushed to that level because of the level of desperation, the level of urgency. And I think that's what it came down to, is the level of urgency. What are you going to do when the urgency level is that high? Are you going to be really careful about where the line should be, about how fair you're being to someone in that power position? Or are you going to err on the other side and worry about apologizing for hurting their feelings later?
It's a fair point, but the main point is that the film doesn't decide for you. And I think that's part of what makes it an outstanding documentary. It'd be interesting to go back and watch Searching for Sugar Man to see if it deserved to beat this, because I think it's pretty strong. And it's been a long time. We've been 0 for the last 3 or 4 indies, but Davey's finally liked another one.
Yeah, I had a long streak, though. I liked most of them.
Yeah, throughout all of 2016, he liked all the 2011 indies. And then he liked the first 2012 indie we had, if you remember Killer Joe, Davey.
Mm-hmm.
And then we hit a skid between Amore and Sound of My Voice and Sleepwalk with Me and Ruby Sparks. And Rust and Bone was, I guess, the bottom of the barrel for Davey.
I think Sound of My Voice, I think I liked, right? Didn't I?
You were more like, it's okay, as I recall.
Okay, yeah.
That sounds about right. It's funny because I loved Rust and Bone, and Davey really, really didn't like it.
That's terrible. That is irredeemable, that film.
Not terrible. It's understand if you don't like it, but it's not a terrible movie. It's accomplished in its own way. Devin, you weren't on the episode. I don't suppose you've seen Rust and Bone by director Jacques Audiard with Marianne Cotillard?
No, I haven't.
She should do Rust and Bone on one of those things. What do we call those things?
Second run.
Yeah.
He doesn't really pay attention to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Speaking of other things that we do, our next Indie Spotlight, which will be our final 2012 Indie Spotlight, and it'll be in early January. And the trivia is a successful but almost forgotten British playwright of the 40s and 50s gets readapted in 2012. And that'll be our next Indie Spotlight at the beginning of January. But before then, we got our next show is episode 45.3, and that's going to be our classic. And we're going to go back celebrating the 30-year anniversary of the Best Picture winner of that year, The Last Emperor, is our next classic movie discussion. That's coming up this Thursday, the 28th of December. We'll save our Happy New Year's wishes until then. So we'll see you this Thursday. And guys, I feel like Luke here is getting lonely, so maybe I should bring him a guest, like bring him a girlfriend. So we have a full party here now. Emma's going to join the society as well because we needed some women.
Good addition.
So yeah, if we're going to add anybody, might as well. be Emma. So we'll see if she's back for the classic movie discussion on Thursday. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I can now declare this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.